Matt Cuthbert, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for being flexible in moving times around. And yeah, it's great to get you on. And like we said just before you hit record, this is a topic, microdosing is a topic that is catching a lot of people's interest, is creating a lot of discussion, a lot of people tapping into you and your expertise. And it's probably something we haven't covered in loads of depth since Derek Hansen came on the podcast, God knows how long ago, 5 years ago. It's been mentioned, but not gone in depth. So that's the reason I wanted to get you on. But before we dive into microdosing, a bit of story on you. Like, people don't know who you are, what you're doing now, how you've got to where you are.
Yeah, so I'm currently working at the Football Association. So my role is women's physical performance coach. The team I work with directly is the under-17s and have done for the last couple of seasons, will be doing for the season coming up. But I've worked throughout the whole pathway from under-23s down with some very infrequent support to the Lionesses with the seniors, but that's mostly just in terms of like profiling, testing and stuff like that. On the odd occasion it was completed. So yeah, I've been at the FA for, this will be my 5th season that I've just completed. 3 of those, or 3.5 of those, was as a PhD student. So they funded my PhD, which was very kind of them, and appreciate that massively. And that was to look into microdosing as a potential sort of programming solution for our international players. The last 1.5 years has been as a full-time member of the staff. Prior to that, I was completing my master's and working for a short period at Bury Football Club within their academy, and then before that I was doing my undergrad. So I've gone straight through undergrad, masters, PhD, all at University of Salford. So working with like the likes of Paul Comfort, John McMahon, Paul Jones, like some very well-known names from that group, and they've been like pretty instrumental in sort of the research aspect of where I've come from. But yeah, so followed it through and then just got as much experience as I could do along the way. So during my undergrad, I was working with sort of a lot of the university sport teams that sort of we helped out, and then got the role in academy football and men's academy football with Bury, which then was a stepping stone into working in football and getting the role at the FA. So it's a short career so far, and like long may it continue, but there's been a lot packed into it, and I've like enjoyed both aspects of the research as well as actually getting involved in the coaching as well. So
Nice. Excellent. What an exciting time to be involved in women's sport.
Oh yeah.
But not only women's sport, but women's football, especially now we're a couple of days into the World Cup. Yeah, super exciting time.
Yeah, it's like the way it's been blowing up, and obviously with the Euros win last summer, which was unbelievable, like managed to be there for the final. It's like, yeah, one of the best days. Just the atmosphere was incredible. It was really friendly atmosphere, and yeah, packing out Wembley for that final was unbelievable. So yeah, we've got a lot of talented players coming through the system, and it's like, yeah, as you say, really exciting time.
Excellent. Right. Let's dive in. Thank you for that, by the way, but let's dive in. So microdosing, what is it and what isn't it? And I think this is something that I asked you in your Sportsman 6, so we dived into microdosing, but feel free to build that out, add a bit more extra context. But yeah, is there any confusion, or has confusion built up around microdosing, and could you just smooth that over for us?
Yeah, for sure. So what is it? If you go so we published, as part of my PhD, a meta-analyses on training frequency, and we actually provided a definition within that. So our definition of microdosing is the division of total volume within a microcycle across frequent, short duration, repeated bouts. So that's the sort of, the almost dictionary definition that we've provided. But I think with that is a lot of I think a lot of coaches like things that are black and white, particularly like technical coaches that we work with. They want things to be a bit black and white. We've kept this very ambiguous and grey as a definition, because like it is all a bit relative. In the way that like shorter duration, like if you've got athletes who are doing or if we just focus on doing resistance training, however many hours a week, because they're well trained, they might be doing a couple of hours a day if it ties into their sport. So Olympic weightlifters, like their technical sessions are their weightlift, like resistance training sessions as well. So short duration for them might be 45 minutes to an hour, whereas, and then like that repeated throughout the week. Whereas actually for like footballers soccer players that I work with, like we'll be lucky to get a couple of hours in a week. So actually shorter duration for that might be your 15 to 20 minutes, either prior to going out on the pitch, or depending on how your scheduling works, it might end up being post session. So yeah, I guess that's how like we define it. And like the frequency will change depending on trainer status, depending on your sport and your scheduling. But it's just that repeated element of knowing what your total volume is going to be within that microcycle, and then dividing it across however many ways you want to do it. And that's where you start then layering it up in the way that actually, yeah, there's a few benefits or potential benefits that you can get from there in terms of, with the timing of it. If you're doing it pre-session, you might actually acutely be able to get some benefits from a post-activation performance enhancement point of view, or a priming point of view if you're doing it the night before or however many hours before training. So there's additional layers to it, but at its most basic level, I'd say it is just the division of volume. So as part of my PhD, we ended up doing an intervention, which was sort of your classic like training frequency study, but we did it within a team sport in season, because then there's that added like contextual factors involved. And that was a group of category 2 football players or soccer players that were used to performing in season or having prescribed 2 sessions a week. They were about 45 minutes to an hour long. We divided them across 4 sessions, and they were still full body. So rather than like dividing it up in the way that you might do legs one day, or like body part split, or however you want to look at that, we did it where it was just the number of sets that were then divided up. Everything else pretty much stayed the same. And like with the meta-analyses that we ended up getting published on training frequency, providing that the volume is matched between the groups, there's no real difference between whether you do it multiple times a week or just once or twice, as the case was there. I guess where the differences then start occurring is actually if the compliance is a bit lower in one group, or the volumes aren't matched, because I mean, we know we have issues with players that like they get niggles, they end up missing training because of whatever reason in terms of the resistance aspect to that, and then therefore compliance drops. So I remember you did like a series of podcasts with some of the guys from the FA a couple of years ago. I remember Ben Rosenblatt mentioning the fact that like at its most basic level, I think microdosing can have a really big impact on just increasing compliance, in the way that you miss one session out of a twice a week, then you're missing 50% of the volume. Whereas if you've got 4 sessions across the week and you miss one session, then you're only missing 25%. Obviously, the more you divide it up, the lower that percentage is. But if you're only doing 1 session a week, because that's all you can fit in, you've got a 2-game week, for example, you miss that and you're missing 100% of the volume. And that's when you start, getting towards some level of detraining. So I've kind of rambled on a little bit around what it is.
That's great.
But yeah, that's probably its most basic level. What it isn't, just to go on and answer that question, is like I don't put like a big disclaimer up, and like I don't think we being the royal we of like me and the guys who have supported me throughout my PhD, believe that it's like the be all and end all. I think it is another tool that can be used to help in a number of different ways, but it isn't necessarily always appropriate. There might be times in the season or with certain groups of athletes where it isn't the right way about going about things. Alternatively, like it does have the potential to bring lots of different benefits, which we have covered in a recent review that's just been published. So yeah, it's one tool in the toolbox. I think it could be like a Swiss Army knife, because I'm biased and I think there's lots of different options and different avenues that it could go down, and based off like various acute chronic programming strategies, motor learning, individualization, which we can go into more detail on. But I don't think it's the be all and end all. Just to sort of front that up, I think there's loads of benefits to it, but there's potential pitfalls as well, which we can go into detail as well.
Absolutely. We'll dive into all that in the next 45 minutes. But there was an editorial that we'd mentioned. I can't remember what we'd quoted in the, or you'd mentioned in the Sportsmith 6, that there was not a questioning of microdosing, but is it just a revamp of something else with a cool name?
Oh yeah. So there was an opinion piece that sort of old wine, new bottle, or
something like that. Yeah.
And like, to some degree, I'd like agree with like that statement in the way that actually, again, just to refer back to the review that we've just had published, like this, you can take so many different influences from different areas of strength and conditioning. It doesn't, where the concepts therefore aren't new, we just might be shaping them up and applying them in a different way. I guess like to go back to Hansen, who probably first mentioned it with you in his podcast like a few years ago. He then like followed it up with so he mentioned it in a blog post that introduced the concept. He then published another blog post that was referring to it in terms of a flavor of the month trend, and actually wanted to rebrand it to micro priming rather than microdosing because of that. I guess his thoughts around like it's just repetitive, like, well, not repetitive, but sprint drills, and coming at it from a sprint coaching perspective, it's just that repeated element of increasing the volume of work that might be boring and it might be a bit monotonous, but if you're breaking it up, you're then getting greater intensity. And so it's becoming maybe a popular term, but I think it's actually, I'd probably refer it more to as like an umbrella term, which we can then fit a lot of different concepts under. Like I said, in terms of like acute chronic programming, we've got like the from an acute perspective, post-activation performance enhancement, like you'll do your microdosed volume, a very small amount of microdose volume, and then potentially have benefits a few minutes later on another training stimulus. Priming might be a few hours later, and then like your classic sort of super compensation, sort of 72 hours plus. And that's where we, with that review, really wanted to hone in on the fact that although the sort of language that you may use and the concepts, or not the concepts, whether it's the language that is used that changes or the mechanism that is there for either adaptation or performance enhancement, like they might change, but the picture of it stays the same. So the time frame might be a few minutes, it might be a couple of hours, it might be a few days. The language, therefore, you then use alongside that will change, but actually the picture of it is you apply a stress, a bit like the classic fitness fatigue model. You apply a stress, you then recover from it, and you super compensate, or you get some level of potentiation. So we wanted to really focus in on the fact that it's a full spectrum of acute and chronic, but the picture pretty much can stay the same throughout. It's just then the language that changes and the mechanisms that underpin that either adaptation or enhancement. So, just to circle back to the fact that we do pull a lot of influence from different concepts.
So you mentioned a couple of benefits, well, quite a few benefits of microdosing. Is there anything in addition to the ones that you've mentioned, compliance, post-activation, potentiation, priming, all that kind of stuff? Is there anything in addition to that we could that you need to mention?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess there was, within the framework that we've just had published, there's sort of 4 concepts or 4 overarching buckets with these sort of categories that they fall under. So the first one's competition schedule. With microdosing and the ability to have a bit more flexibility around when, because it's smaller chunks of time, when you implement the sessions, you can be a bit more manipulative around your competition schedule. So within academy football, when I worked in that, within like under 18s, you typically play your games on a Saturday or Sunday, but typically on a Saturday. but you'll have your FA Youth Cup games on a Wednesday, and then if any games get cancelled, particularly over the winter, then they get backlogged and you end up having a period of fixed congestion, which happens in senior football as well. So actually, when you're starting to get into that 2 game weeks or 3 games in 10 days, which starts to get into the world of the international football that we work in, where you've only got a few days turnaround, then actually the flexibility of, okay, we've got 20 minutes here, we can fit in this stimulus so that we don't get a level of detraining because they're missing sessions. So yeah, competition schedule is one bucket that we go into. The acute chronic programming, which I've kind of mentioned before, which as well as the post-activation performance enhancement, resistance priming, you can get like the repeated bout effect and utilize that. So potentially as you're coming to the end of one training cycle and you know you're going to introduce a novel stimulus in the next one, you might be able to microdose from what would be a minimum effective dose. And we can come on to why they're two very different concepts a little later. But you might then microdose a smaller dose of whether it's eccentric only exercise or just a novel stimulus. You might be able to build that up to then when you actually start integrating it fully within your resistance training program within that new cycle. So there's various training sequencing aspects of like when and how you put you break up those microdosing sessions, and then potentially even concurrent training as well. So you've got a shorter session, a bit more flexibility around it. Actually, if you're doing some really focused aerobic work, or if you're microdosing your aerobic work, but there's levels where you can maybe split the time difference between those sessions further to then not end up having as much of an interference effect, particularly within your team sport athletes. Acute chronic programming that they sit in the motor learning is one of the other buckets. So we sort of included growth and maturation, long-term athlete development in that, and then injury risk mitigation or return to play. They fit in there where actually the volumes that they're doing can't be too high in one session because then you get fatigue, is either risk of further injury or actually you really want to focus on their motor learning patterns, getting good reps. So doing short but more frequent can then improve or help assist with that. And then the final bucket was individualization. So we included female athlete health and performance within that because although there's a lot of research that sort of outlines that there's not that much difference or there's not that much effect of menstruation impacting training. But actually when you dig deeper into it, it's very individualized. Like we obviously I work within women's football, like the symptomology and the effects of the menstrual cycle can actually be like so widely, such a wide range within just one squad, especially at the younger levels where they maybe haven't had the education or the experience to know how to either deal with those symptoms or find strategies to benefit them within that period. Actually, within those individuals, there may be times where you go, okay, we want you to focus about what's happening out on the pitch today. Don't worry about your resistance training now. We'll either tackle that later, or because we're only missing 25% of your 100% volume, we can change things a little bit and be a bit more flexible. So I guess, compliance and flexibility are probably two things that run throughout the whole thing. Player autonomy, I think something that we're really going after at the FA now is decision making in players. We expect players to make decisions out on the pitch from a footballing perspective. So why are we taking that decision making away from them off the pitch? So actually you might get an individual, if it's appropriate for them to do so, if you've got enough days for recovery, you might get some individuals who go, no, I'd rather get all my training volume done in this one session so I don't have to see the gym again. You might, on the flip side, get someone who, again, doesn't want to be in the gym that much, but would rather just do 20 minutes in one day so they don't have to be in there for as long. But then, increase their compliance through that. There's a degree of flexibility with that sort of player autonomy, and providing that they're given the right guardrails of, well, we're going to, if you want to be in every day, then we can like either taper the week so that you're still doing it every day. You might have one slightly longer session than towards game day, but you're still able to do it every day. We'll still chunk it up slightly differently. So I guess that's one other thing to consider, is the fact that, we talk about dividing volume across short duration frequent bouts, but they don't have to be equal. Like if we're talking about just dividing total volume, then actually you might be able to taper your week where you have a 20-minute session or a 25-minute session at the beginning of your training week, and then a 5-minute, 10-minute like primer on a match day. So yeah, there's that individualization aspect to that, and trainer status probably it falls under that bracket, but maybe influences the decisions a bit more compared to some of them which are influenced by microdosing. So yeah, they're the 4 buckets that we've ended up putting things under. And the review I keep mentioning is very focused on team sports and resistance training. But I think there's a lot more research to be done before we can like make all the claims in the world. But there's always the potential that it doesn't necessarily have to be in a team sport. I think there's a lot of value in individual sports being able to use it. I've recently had a conversation with a few of the guys at Swimming Scotland, who are with the EIS, it's UKIS now, I think, about a couple of their swimmers and how they could potentially integrate microdosing within sort of their competition schedule or the lead into that, as well as some return to sport work, and then like a military population as well, or tactical population, because a lot of the early research that was done in this area was referred to as microtraining rather than microdosing. But Killen et al, they divided 3 45-minute sessions into 9 15-minute sessions within a military population, and found that there were no real differences, and that included like endurance work as well as strength and power, loosely, within that. So yeah, the populations I think that microdosing could influence are greater than just team sports. And then I've alluded to it there with the military stuff, but the type of training in terms of like, we talk about resistance training, but speed work, I guess plyos potentially, if you want to split them up from resistance training, but aerobic. So we've done quite a lot of work with Gareth Sanford before. I know you've had it on a couple of times, and those podcasts are class. So anyone else who's not listened to them, give them a good listen, because like he knows what he's talking about, and he does talk about a lot of like putting like money in the bank in terms of the low level, like low intensity aerobic work for a lot of athletes. Like you might need to accumulate 4 or 5 hours of that across a week, or how I'd probably pick that number out of my head, but like you need to, or you can accumulate a lot of that, and it's like putting money in the bank for when the cost of games or competition then takes it out. And you'll probably have an easier time trying to convince an athlete, particularly in team sports, to accumulate that amount of time if you break it up into 20-minute sessions frequently throughout the week. And if they're then of low cost and don't really impact their training, then actually as a form of like recovery or on a recovery day or anything like that, it's easier to drip feed them in like multiple occasions. So yeah, I think there's benefits to not just team sports, not just within resistance training, but across loads of areas.
Good, so good. So with all that said, I know you mentioned and you caveated the conversation with this. We don't believe this is a be-all and end-all. There's certain times when you wouldn't use it. What are those certain times when you think, I don't know if this is based on experience, based on, speaking to the people, based on research from yourself and from others, any particular reason why you wouldn't think this is appropriate?
Yeah, well, I guess a couple of examples. So I guess throwing back to the type of population that you're working with, for team sports, it's very easy, or could be quite easy, to fall in the trap of we'll use it all season. I think there's probably value in it being the case in some sports, because otherwise, like, when are you getting the training stimulus in? If you can improve players throughout pre-season and then they don't detrain throughout the season, then actually from where we are now, that's potentially a big win for certain individuals. And so there's potential value to it. But actually, if you're already working on a fairly minimum effective dose throughout a season, which that probably just comes down to the programming anyway. But if you're just thinking, right, I'm working on a minimum effective dose, we're going to microdose that. If you then start falling below that total, like 100% compliance each week, then you're then falling below your minimum effective dose. So yeah, there's potential pitfalls there. I think when it comes to like an individual athlete, you've got time within the season where you've got maybe a general preparation phase that the bulk of your volume probably shouldn't necessarily come from a microdosing, because you've got the time to hit them with a large volume, allow them to recover and do it again. But saying that, like I sort of alluded to the Olympic weightlifting stuff earlier, where there was research by Hakkinen and I can't remember the other author's name, which is poor, but Hakkinen did some work where like they were doing like huge volumes, but they were essentially microdosing because they split that into 2 days throughout a week. So actually there's still potential benefits from an individual if you are trying to get huge volumes in there. But yeah, I think there's probably times within that as a cycle. And then as a team sports example, when we were doing the intervention for my PhD, which is sort of in the works to get published, there were 2 individuals within the microdosing group who fell below 50% compliance. And those 2 happened to be goalkeepers. Like, it might just be coincidence, but when you then think about how their schedule is built, because they do a lot of position-specific work prior to the rest of the team going out, that happened to be more often than not when the microdosing group were completing their sessions. They do a pre-pitch session, whereas when they did the traditional sessions, because that was scheduled for the afternoon after they've all been out on the pitch, then they were able to complete them to a greater extent. And so, yeah, I think like maybe if there's position specific work or the scheduling is different for some individuals, then it may be more appropriate. And then like when you think about goalkeepers as well, match day can typically be one of their lowest volume days, apart from any rest day, depending on who they're playing and how busy they are in the net. So actually on those days, you might be able to hit them with a traditional volume and then microdose the rest of the week, like, and taper it to what they're doing out on the pitch. So yeah, I still think there's value in microdosing for those individuals, but it has to be done well or done right in the way that they still get a training stimulus throughout the week. And if they keep missing it because they're not doing it with the rest of the group, then there's the flexibility to move that. With like young players and young individuals who still have like education, they still have loads of other things that fill up their time. If there is less flexibility, then a more rigid like 2 a week might be more appropriate.
So the next thing for me to ask is we've gone through benefits, we've gone through potential areas or circumstances, situations where it's not appropriate, either on a group level or an individual level, and certain things to think about, like the goalkeeper scenario. That's just scheduling and I suppose a programming issue, maybe rather than a microdosing versus traditional approach. However, it'd be great to get some specific examples for how you've used it or how colleagues have used it, and feel free to kind of go back or use what you're currently doing now, and maybe a little bit sensitive with the FA, I'm not quite sure, but to get some real world insight into how you've tackled it, how when you've put it in, when you've taken it out, why you've done each thing, and just get a bit of real world stuff, if that's all right.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess from my world, in terms of the under-17s, we get a huge range in where players come into our camps from like a training volume or training history, in the way that we have some players who are playing or training day in, day out with a senior outfit. We've got some who are in like under-18s teams within the academies that are training most days, playing a couple of times a week. And then we also have some players that are right at the younger age band where it's like under 16s, they might still only be training twice a week and playing once a week at most. I guess for a little bit more detail of those in senior squads, they might be training day in, day out, but actually their match minutes might be like rock bottom as well, because they're obviously sat on a bench, and because they're away with the seniors, they might not be getting match minutes, or they're wanting to be kept fresh for seniors just in case they end up getting game time. So yeah, we get a really wide range in where players are coming from. So the information that we get from the clubs is crucial on that, so we can try and individualize as much as we can coming into, or have an idea of where they are coming into it, so we can then, like with the repeat bout stuff, in the way that any kind of novel stimulus is going to cook them. And if we've got 3 games in 7 days, which is typically at 17s, we'll have 2-day turnarounds. So we'll have match day plus 1, match day minus 1, and then another match day, and do that again. So we'll typically have camps where we've got 3 fixtures if it's a tournament. Then for Euros finals, it goes to 5 games, but we still only have those 2-day turnarounds. And I'm aware there's other sports in the world that actually have quicker turnarounds, have more matches and a more condensed fixture schedule. But in terms of what the players are prepared for, it's a big spike in load. It's a big, big change for them. So that's where like the microdosing thought process came in, where my PhD stemmed from, is that actually if we've got these players for 10 to 14 to 21, and if you're at seniors like to 30 plus days, then actually that's when your training residuals start depleting and you start detraining for certain characteristics. So one thing that we've actually been successful with the last couple of seasons, and particularly in the last season, is just a process of, on training days, we have an individual prep session, which I guess is more of like the traditional like pre-activation. It's players' time to do what they need to do to get ready. We're there to interject with certain individuals if they've got anything that they're coming off the back of in terms of injury, any specific work we want to do with them prior to the next session, which is then a team prep session. So that individual prep will be like anywhere from half an hour to like 15 minutes, depending on the age group. The then team preparation will be whole group doing some level of microdosing, which is where actually this will be like another 15 to 20 minutes. It'll be as individualized as we can make it based off where the players are coming in. No, we try our best not to implement any like really new and novel stimuli again, so that it's not cooking them for match day. But we'll get some level of stimulus in before then going out onto the pitch, and then either going straight into football because we've done the work in the gym, they're ready to go, they get the boots on, and they can start doing some technical work, where either they can then do the technical work, and then if we're doing some extensive sessions where they're going to cover a lot of distance at high speed, we can build them up to that, or we can do that straight away and then them go into the technical work. It allows that process of individual prep, team prep, then allows us to manipulate what happens on the pitch a little bit more, and we get buy-in from the coaches, because as soon as they're on the grass, they have the potential to get stuck straight in, depending on what the coaches are wanting to do. So it gives the impression that we are giving time back to the coaches, where they don't get a great deal at international football. Like the players will meet up on a match day -2, so the majority of training sessions is a -1, where you're actually wanting the volume to be a little bit lower to like get a lot of the tactical information in quickly to these players who have really quick turnarounds and have maybe only just had a +1, where depending on the group, we might have had the day off, we might have had some light work, might have had some top-ups with the subs, but for the majority of the starting 11, they'll probably have that day off within the youth pathway. So we don't get a lot of time with them on the pitch. It creates a bit of more buy-in and a bit more cohesion with the technical coaches on that. So that's where we'll fit our microdosing sessions in. And like I say, the information we get from clubs is crucial on that, because we can then know what they've got coming in. So actually, if we know what they would have had planned for their week, we can microdose back to, actually we might not quite get the volumes that they were aiming for, but we're still providing that same stimulus at the same intensity or load that they were planned for. It might just be the volumes that have changed slightly. So yeah, that's in an ideal world. For when we don't get that information, it then makes it a little bit more tricky, but we'll also then work on things that is going to sort of almost that really low volume work that allows us to maybe get a post-activation performance enhancement stimulus, because I mean, trainer status wise, if they're not, a lot of the research says you have to be of a certain strength level to get some of those benefits. But actually, as long as it's not detrimental to performance and it's still following a similar sort of pattern to what they do back at club, then it allows us to continue that. So they're not detraining when they're with us. So they're still performing as they should do at the end of camp. But at the same time, we're not then handing them back to the clubs where you go, oh, you've got to start again, sorry. So that's sort of loosely how we've used it within the pathway.
Because that's really interesting. I mean, not everyone who's listening is going to work with international footballers when they've got big periods of time where they don't see them or have hands-on sessions, group sessions. But each, say, take football, for example, or rugby, you're always going to have them groups. You're going to have the small group of regular starters. You're going to have the small group of regular subs. You're going to have those in between that come in and out. Then you're going to have the younger guys or girls who are on the periphery, who are maybe sometimes subs, sometimes not in the squad. So you're always dealing with these 4 or 5 groups that are interchanging. So it's definitely applicable, even though obviously not everyone's going to work in international football and tournament football. So
yeah, definitely. I think it adds that, I guess that comes into like the individualization stuff that I was talking about earlier. Like we try and go after, like, it's probably is it an oxymoron? Anyway, basically we call it collective individualization. So although it seems like a conflict in terms, like actually we start to bucket players together based off some of their physical characteristics that we investigate through profiling, where you go, actually you guys are of a similar pattern or like strength or physiology. That means that you guys can do a fairly similar stimulus, or like these are your strengths, like we know you're good at decelerating, so we're going to put you through maybe a little bit more of a challenging deceleration task compared to some individuals who we know aren't good at that. So there's an element of allowing us to do that in small chunks rather than everyone doing the same thing, everyone doing the same volume, and then it cooking some individuals and disadvantaging them compared to others who are maybe a bit more prepared for that.
So you spoke about a little bit about the minimum effective dose, and not if that's where you aim, you're only going to, because of lack of compliance, because of, I don't know, appointments for semi-professional players, or little niggles that brings you down from there. So in terms of like detraining and that variation in training frequency, where are you trying to pitch it when it comes to that microdosing? Just so you're not looking at the minimum all the time. What's the least we can do? Because that is something that does get peddled a little bit, like the minimum effective dose, and like you say, it's not always great because you only go down from there. So where do you pitch it, and how do you work that with the current philosophy of microdosing?
Yeah, I guess we maybe not nailed it on in the way that, with the dose response of whatever prescription that you're going for, you can go anywhere from minimum effective dose to maximum effective dose. So within the review that we've just published that I've mentioned again, that we've got we've translated it from a like pharmacological point of view in the way that you have an efficacy curve, which is 1S curve. Then a little bit further along, once you go past 100% in that efficacy curve, it then starts increasing a toxicity curve, so a second S. Within that bracket is like a very grey area that in pharmacology it's referred to as the therapeutic index. So in that, it's like a doctor, if they're prescribing any kind of medication, can go from that minimum effective dose to the maximum effective dose and be comfortable that within that population you might start at the bottom and work up until it is effective for that individual, knowing that there's individual range within that. If you go past that maximum effective dose, that's where, or planned overreaching as we've sort of compared it to, you then start getting into the realms of lethal dose or overtraining. So we are really keen to advocate the fact that you can prescribe anywhere within that zone. Like we call it a training zone rather than therapeutic index, but you can prescribe anywhere within that range. So actually, like the way I sort of alluded to the fact that we might even not got it quite nailed on is like, do you prescribe for your like ideal optimal training zone, right slap bang in the middle, knowing that you're probably going to miss a few sessions, so it might edge towards a minimum effective dose, or you plan for your planned overreaching, like right at the top of the maximum effective dose, because you know you're going to miss some sessions, or you know your athletes and you know they're not going to miss anything, so actually you prescribe spot on, because if you aim to go over and then they just happen to turn up to every session and apply it, and then technical coaches are like, well, why are they cooked? Like, why are they not in the best shape that they'd expect, or why are they so fatigued? And you go, well, actually, because they actually turned up for once. So like, there's elements of like, where do you go with that? Because then actually, if you do prescribe for that minimum effective dose right at the bottom end, because you want them to be in a good shape on the assumption that they're going to be able to be at every session, or you're able to manipulate every session, but then in reality it doesn't happen. That's when you start getting below that line or that threshold. So, and it becomes a bit trickier. So yeah, I don't have a real answer as to like where we sit there yet. I think, and it's very individual as well, the way that actually you may start at the bottom for some individuals, because you know what they're like in terms of character and whether they attend every session, or whether they're always the ones that are first in the physio room at the beginning of the morning just saying, oh, like I've got S&C today, like that type of thing. You might prescribe them differently. So yeah, it's very individual in terms of responses, the same way that like with any intervention that we've done, the intervention for my PhD, for example, you get very different responses from even like the same training volume, the same prescription and the same compliance, and you still get different because everyone's physiology is different. So yeah, that's where we're very keen to, again, keep it quite grey in the way that like there's a bandwidth that you could prescribe in, and it may change for various individuals, but actually providing you're still within that, then you're going to get some level of adaptation. And it then always depends on like the magnitude of adaptation that you're expecting or wanting within that time frame. So actually, if you're getting a small like effect size of improvement from day one of the season to the end of the season, well, actually that's a win, because it's still improvement. Like you're not always going to see large improvements throughout the season, whereas actually across the 6 weeks that you've got for, or however long you got, it's probably even less for pre-season. That shows how long I've been out of club football. If you've got a chunk of time within that off season that you're really hitting them with large volumes, then actually, even though the duration's small, you might see large increases. But an increase is an improvement in performance is an improvement. It's better than a degradation. So yeah, probably a very grey answer, but I think we should be comfortable with that, in the way that actually individuals are different. Like each sport's different, so you may fall within that training zone or that therapeutic index at various places at various times.
My last question for you is, you've focused on the resistance training side of things and spoke really well on the work that you've done, the experience that you've had and how it's been implemented. Is there any work going on from yourself? Are you the person to look at the speed side of things or the power side of things? Is there other people working on that from a microdosing perspective on a research angle that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Like I know it was like essentially first conceptualized, like Derek Hansen coming from a sprinting background, like it was very much fairly sprint focused with that, and like I definitely see the benefits that could come from that. But yeah, I think if yeah, anyone who is kind of interested in this area generally, like feel free to reach out, like myself and, as I mentioned, Paul Comfort, John McMahon, like from a research perspective would be like more than interested to discuss where we've experienced it up till now and where we see the direction. I think as well as wanting to outline exactly what we thought microdosing could have a potential to influence, we also accept the fact that we're not experts in all those areas at all. Like it's probably like a really minute like aspect to that whole framework, and it's a bit of a call to arms to go, look, this is where we think it could influence. Like you guys who are interested in these areas of like growth and maturation or like female athlete health, like if these could, if we can help influence or help shape some of the thinking or discussions prior to that then being investigated, then we'd be more than happy to do so. I think it's an exciting area or topic area that is very much developing. Although we're taking lots of concepts from elsewhere, those concepts haven't necessarily been looked at from a microdosing lens and been applied yet. And I know there's loads of difficulties when you are setting up a research project within, like, you can choose however many frequencies to compare against another infinite number of frequencies, but as well as then potentially needing control groups and things like that, it then becomes tricky. But yeah, if we can help shape it and provide some guidance to anyone on that front, like it was a bit of a call to arms to say, like, let's investigate it.
Superb. Well, you mentioned people contacting you. Where can people find you, your work? I know you've mentioned the review a couple of times. Where can people get that?
Yeah, so I mean, I've probably plastered the review all over my Twitter. So the Twitter is probably the easiest place to contact me. So at m_Cuthbert15 is my handle. And like LinkedIn, Dr. Matthew Cuthbert. Yeah. And then they're probably the easiest ways to get in contact with me. And if you don't hear back from me immediately, just give me another nudge, because I can be, as you've experienced, can be slow to respond.
You're a busy man. Don't apologise. It's absolutely fine.
So yeah, they're the places to get in touch, or give, like I've mentioned, Paul Comfort or John McMahon a nudge if you're ever interested in type of research, because they're always super willing to have a conversation as well. Obviously they've got research areas like far and away exceeding where just the microdosing is. So yeah, any kind of interest in just give any of us a shout, and we'd be more than happy to get involved.
Perfect. Well, Matt, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming on. Really appreciate your flexibility with the constraints that are going on over here right now. But keep in touch. Excited to see where the area goes. It's been a long time coming to get you on and chat about microdosing, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. It's been enjoyable chat, and yeah, let's keep in touch.
Cheers, Matt. Thanks, mate.
Cheers.